Hi friends, in today's video, let's take a look at what Cleanth Brooks has got to say about the canonization by John Donne in his essay, The Language of Paradox. So here it goes. I should like to refer the reader to a concrete case. Donne's canonization ought to provide a sufficiently extreme instance. The basic metaphor which underlies the poem and which is reflected in the title involves a sort of paradox. For the poet daringly treats profane love as if it were divine love. The canonization is not that of a pair of holy anchorites who have renounced the world and the flesh. The hermitage of each is the other's body, and they do renounce the world, and so their title to sainthood is cunningly argued. The poem then is a parody of Christian sainthood, but it is an intensely serious parody of a sort that modern man, habituated as he is to an easy yes or no, can hardly understand. He refuses to accept the paradox as a serious rhetorical device, and since he is able to accept it only as a cheap trick, he is forced into this dilemma. Either Donne does not take love seriously. Here he is merely sharpening his wit as a sort of mechanical exercise, or Donne does not take sainthood seriously. Here he is merely indulging in a cynical and bawdy parody. Neither account is true. A reading of the poem will show that Donne takes both love and religion seriously. It will show further that the paradox is here his inevitable instrument. But to see this plainly will require a closer reading than most of us give to poetry. The poem opens dramatically on a note of exasperation. The you whom the speaker addresses is not identified. We can imagine that it is a person, perhaps a friend, who is objecting to the speaker's love affair. At any rate, the person represents the practical world which regards love as a silly affectation. To use the metaphor on which the poem is built, the friend represents the secular world which the lovers have renounced. Donne begins to suggest this metaphor in the first stanza by the contemptuous alternatives which he suggests to the friend. Child, my palsy, oh my God, my grey hairs or ruined fortune flout. The implications are, all right, consider my love as an infirmity, as a disease, if you will, but confine yourself to my other infirmities, my palsy, my approaching old age, my ruined fortune. You stand a better chance of curing those. In chiding me for this one, you are simply wasting your time as well as mine. Why don't you pay attention to your own welfare? Go on, get wealth and honor for yourself. What should you care if I do give these up in pursuing my love? The two main categories of secular success are neatly and contemptuously epitomized in the line. Or the king's real or his stamped face. Cultivate the court and gaze at the king's face there. Or if you prefer, get into business and look at his face stamped on coins. But let me alone. This conflict between the real world and the lover absorbed in the world of love runs through the poem. It dominates the second stanza, in which the torments of love, so vivid to the lover, affect the real world not at all. What merchants' ships have my sighs drowned? It is touched on the fourth stanza in the contrast between the world chronicle, which suggests secular history with its pomp and magnificence, the history of kings and princes, and the word sonnets with its suggestions of trivial and precious intricacy. The conflict appears again in the last stanza, only to be resolved when the unworldly lovers, love's saints, who have given up the world, paradoxically achieve a more intense world. But here the paradox is still contained in and supported by the dominant metaphor. So does the holy anchorite win a better world by giving up this one. But before going on to discuss this development of the theme, it is important to see what else the second stanza does. For it is in this second stanza and the third that the poet shifts the tone of the poem, modulating from the note of irritation with which the poem opens into the quite different tone with which it closes. Donne accomplishes the modulation of tone by what may be called an analysis of love metaphor. Here, as in many of his poems, he shows that he is thoroughly self conscious about what he is doing. In second stanza, he fills with the conventionalized figures of the Petrarchan tradition, the wind of lovers' sighs, the floods of lovers' tears, etc., extravagant figures with which the contemptuous secular friend might be expected to tease the lover. The implication is that the poet himself recognizes the absurdity of the Petrarchan love metaphors, but what of it? The very absurdity of the jargon which lovers are expected to talk makes for his argument. Their love, however absurd it may appear to the world, does no harm to the world. The practical friend need have no fears. There will still be wars to fight and lawsuits to argue. The opening of the third stanza suggests that this vein of irony is to be maintained. The poet points out to his friend the infinite fund of such absurdities which can be applied to lovers. Call her one, me another fly. We are tapers too, and at our own cost die. For that matter, the lovers can conjure up for themselves plenty of such fantastic comparisons. They know what the world thinks of them. But these figures of the third stanza are no longer the threadbare Petrarchan conventionalities. They have sharpness and bite. The last one, the likening of the lovers to the phoenix, is fully serious, and with it, the tone has shifted from ironic banter into a defiant but controlled tenderness. The effect of the poet's implied awareness of the lover's apparent madness is to cleanse and revivify metaphor, to indicate the sense in which the poet accepts it, and thus to prepare us for accepting seriously the fine and seriously intended metaphors which dominate the last two stanzas of the poem. The opening line of the fourth stanza, we can die by it, if not live by love, achieves an effect of tenderness and deliberate resolution. The lovers are ready to die to the world. They are committed. They are not callow but confident. The basic metaphor of the saint one notices is being carried out, and the lovers in their renunciation of the world have something of the confident resolution of the saint. By the by, the word legend, if unfit for tombs and hearths, a legend be, in Donne's time meant the life of a saint. The lovers are willing to forego the ponderous and stately chronicle and to accept the trifling and insubstantial sonnet instead. But then, if the urn be well wrought, it provides a finer memorial for one's ashes that does the pompous and grotesque monument. With the finely contemptuous yet quiet phrase, half-acre tombs, the world which the lovers reject expands into something gross and vulgar. But the figure works further. The pretty sonnets will not merely hold their ashes as a decent earthly memorial. Their legend, their story, will gain them canonization, and approved as love's saints, other lovers will invoke them. In this last stanza, the theme receives a final complication. The lovers in rejecting life actually win in the most intense life. This paradox has been hinted at earlier in the phoenix metaphor. Here it receives a powerful dramatization. The lovers, in becoming hermits, find that they have not lost the world but have gained the world in each other, now a more intense and more meaningful world. Donne is not content to treat the lover's discovery as something which comes to them passively, but rather as something which they actively achieve. They are like the sage, God's athlete, who did the whole world's soul contract and drove into the glasses of their eyes. The image is that of a violent squeezing as of a powerful hand. And what do the lovers drive into each other's eyes? The countries, towns, and courts which they renounced in the first stanza of the poem. The unworldly lovers thus become the most worldly of all. The tone with which the poem closes is one of the triumphant achievement. But the tone is a development contributed to by various earlier elements. One of the most important elements which works towards our acceptance of the final paradox is the figure of the phoenix, which will bear a little further analysis. The comparison of the lovers to the phoenix is very skillfully related to the other earlier comparisons, that with which the lovers are like burning tapers, and that in which they are like the eagle and the dove. The phoenix comparison gathers up both. The phoenix is a bird, and like the tapers, it burns. We have a selected series of items. The phoenix figure seems to come in a natural stream of association. Call us what you will, the lover says. The rattles of his desperation, the first comparisons that occur to him. The comparison to the phoenix seems thus merely another outlandish one, the most outrageous of all. But it is this most fantastic one, stumbled over apparently in his haste, that the poet goes on to develop. It really describes the lovers best and justifies their renunciation. For the phoenix is not two, but one. We two, being one, are it, and it burns, not like the taper at its own cost, but to live again. Its death is life. We die and rise the same. The poet literally justifies the fantastic assertion. In the 16th and 17th centuries, to die means to experience the consummation of the act of love. The lovers after the act are the same. Their love is not exhausted in mere lust. It is their title to canonization. Their love is like the phoenix. I hope that I did not seem to juggle the meaning of die. The meaning of that I have cited can be abundantly justified in the literature of the period. Shakespeare uses die in this sense, so does Dryden. Moreover, I do not think I give it undue emphasis. The word is in a crucial position. On it is pivoted the transition of the next stanza. We can die by it, if not live by love, and if unfit for tombs. Most important of all, the sexual meaning of die does not contradict the other meaning. The poet is saying our death is really more intense life. We can afford to trade life, the world, for death, which means love. For that death is the consummation of love. After all, one does not expect to live by love. One expects and wants to die by it. But in the title passage, he is also saying, because our love is not mundane, we can give up the world. Because our love is not merely lust, we can give up the other lust, the lust of wealth and power. Because, and this is said with an inflection of irony, as by one who knows the world too well, because our love can outlast its consummation, we are a minor miracle. We are love's saints. This passage, with its ironical tenderness and its realism, feeds and supports the brilliant paradox with which the poem closes. There is one more factor in developing and sustaining the final effect. The poem is an instance of the doctrine which it asserts. It is both the assertion and the realization of the assertion. The poet has actually before our eyes built within the song the pretty room with which he says the lovers can be content. The poem itself is the well wrought urn which can hold the lover's ashes and which will not suffer in comparison with the prince's half acre tomb. And so, and half necessary are the paradoxes. Donne might have said directly, love in a cottage is enough. The canonization contains this admirable thesis, but it contains a great deal more. He might have been as forthright as a later lyricist who wrote, we will build a sweet little nest somewhere out in the west and let the rest of the world go by. He might even have imitated that more metaphysical lyric which maintains, you are the cream in my coffee. The canonization touches on all these observations, but it goes beyond them, not merely in dignity but in precision. I submit that the only way by which the poet could say what the canonization says is by paradox. More direct methods may be tempting, but all of these enfeeble and distort what is to be said. This statement may seem the less surprising when we reflect on how many of the important things which the poet has to say have to be said by the means of paradox. Most of the language of lovers is such. The canonization is a good example. So is most of the language of religion. He who would save his life He who would save his life must lose it. The last shall be first. Indeed, almost any sight important enough to warrant great poem apparently has to be stated in such terms. Deprived of the character of paradox with its twin concomitants of irony and wonder, the matter of Donne's poem unravels into facts, biological, sociological, and economic. What happens to Donne's lovers if we consider them scientifically without benefits of the supernaturalism which the poet confers upon them? Well, what happens to Shakespeare's lovers? For Shakespeare uses the basic metaphor of the canonization in his Romeo and Juliet. In their conversation, the lovers play with the analogy between the lover and the pilgrim of the Holy Land. Juliet says, for saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.